got a couple slides to get going, and then I just kind of have a picture show that'll play while I talk about our trip. So let's see if, you know what I got to do? Fancy things. So I want to really start by thanking Washington Farm Forestry Association and individuals such as Hemp O'Neill and others in the crowd. I think Ken and Bonnie Miller are also supporters of ag forestry. And I, at one point was, as all class members do, we write thank you letters, and it was really always fun for me to come across names that I recognized as people who donate to and support the Ag Forestry Leadership Program. So gratitude. All the people that go through as class members, we really form wonderful bonds with our classmates, and that's great. But it's also very important that we're making these bonds across the state between foresters and orchardists and all of the winemakers, of course, the hop growers. So there's some extra benefits. But having those connections this time of year when the legislature is in, we really learn how to rally for each other. So gratitude for the support. The culminating event is a seminar that takes us on an international tour. And we went to Vietnam and Cambodia. This is my class. Justin Becker is a member of your chapter, is also my classmate here. Yeah, upper left. And he served as our class treasurer, and so, we each get to learn to be leaders, but we lead each other, and there he was. He was a really integral part of our class, and I'm sorry we were going to tag team, but he couldn't make it today. The objectives of the international trip, every seminar we had, whether it was in Wenatchee or Seattle, Pullman, has a set of objectives. What are we going to learn by being here together for these 3 days, and in this case, 12 days? They're pretty simple. To increase our awareness of the world around us. It really can summarize all 4 of them by saying that. And in order to increase our awareness, we learn about other cultures, we learn about the history. You really kind of get in there and you not really go as a tourist, even though it feels like it at times. We have a different way of seeing these countries. And I say that because not but 3 or 4 years prior, my family made an almost identical trip, landing in Hanoi, going out to see the Halong Bay, and then flying down to Ho Chi Minh City or Saigon, and then taking a boat and ending up in Cambodia. It felt very similar. Very different tours. When you go with your family and you're seeing things, you're definitely a tourist. I mean, we went to the same pearl manufacturing place, but experienced it completely different. The second time I went with people who are shellfish farmers, who are in the business and understanding that trade and the differences in how those oysters were being raised and the product coming out. And then going to not just Halong Bay on a boat to see the neat cave, but also to see the industry around you and understand your place in the world when we have trade with Vietnam. So we would go to the markets, and there'll be pictures later, and you can see envy apples, or you'll see the cherries that come from Wenatchee. And it's really neat to see my classmates' products on these shelves all the way over there in Southeast Asia. So here was basically the rundown of our trip. 12 days. We started in Vietnam. We stayed in places where you see the stars. Went to, it was a flight. We didn't do any adventurous boating, which is probably a good thing, because when my family did it, it was a little bit of a chaos. We ended up in Cambodia, where we went to see some more of the historical sites of Siem Reap, Angkor Wat. You'll see some of those photos, and ended up in Phnom Penh. You see very happy things, and you also see some very grounding, hard parts of history. Clearly, there was an American-Vietnamese conflict that occurred during my early life, well, actually before I was born. Yep, we can learn about it in this museum here too. But also prior to that, learning about the history of this region from the eyes of folks who lived there. When I grew up, it pretty much started at what we would call the Vietnam War. For them, that history started generations and generations prior, between whether it was influence from China or the French, or definitely different interests in this region. And so to have that story be told from a different perspective was also really broadening of our viewpoints. So I'm going to switch over to the slideshow so that the pictures will just play in the background. It's really hard to pick your favorite pictures to show folks, and we probably had thousands. I'll talk a little bit about the objectives. We learned about the trade. We learned about understanding how the climate impacts that region of the world, whether it's the climate that it's just the natural climate, but also in terms of how the climate is changing globally and what that will do to impact their resources. We learned about the risks that a global society has. I will let you know that we were there traveling during January of 2020. Yes, we probably all were infected when we came home, and I'm sorry. We didn't know either. We were a little bit nervous when we landed. There was some flu in China. We're like, we're far away from China. It's not going to be a problem. We'll be fine. This is right around the time of the Lunar New Year, lots of celebrations. Slowly during our trip, some of the celebrations were being truncated, and they were no longer allowing travel between China and Vietnam. And we were starting to get wind that there may be something interesting happening. Nobody anticipated this was going to be a pandemic. So here we are 2 years later, and we look at this time completely different eyes, a different view of what that risk might be. But also reward. We met the most amazing folks. We made great connections. Some of the connections we made had to do with meeting up with different universities or different places that we came with some connections through other people in my class are also world travelers. And then we reached out and found new connections. We went to the embassy and learned that government side of how our governments relate and how we have that trade happening together. But then we went to the university and we learned how there's collaborations going in the world of forestry with the United States and other international entities and Vietnam. Vietnam's forests are really recovering from all the devastation that happened during the most recent war, which was the Vietnam War, where an American conflict. Lots of the forest was just completely devastated. So not only repopulating the forest with native species, also finding exotic species that will grow fast and reestablish that ecosystem. The forests in many places are really quiet. And you think, wow, did we destroy, did this war destroy all the wildlife? It's a combination. One thing you realize is that, humans still, there's not just one ethnic group in this region. So much like we have our indigenous tribes and we have different people who react differently with the land, some of the some of the different ethnic groups in Vietnam would hunt and subsequently have overhunted or reduced a lot of the populations of some of the wildlife populations. So we interacted with a primate preservation group, and it turns out the director at the time is from Ellensburg. So that was pretty cool. I would say gaining the comprehension of the nations around us and our interactions also relates a little bit, and I've had a long time to reflect, of course, so here you are 2 years later getting more wisdom, I think maybe. I don't know, we'll call it wisdom. Who has the story to tell and what the history is that we learn. So, of course, we grow up with our history in Washington or wherever we grow up in our high schools and schools, and then you set foot on the place where you learned about the history, but now you're learning it from someone else's eyes. So you see their perspective, and that kind of blew our minds wide open. Our tour bus guide, John is what he preferred to go by, was frequently discussing about how his access to the internet has changed his own view and his own version of the history that he has grown up in and experienced. So what I really took away was a lot of this storytelling. And I think that's really important to us as tree farmers. My family does have a tree farm. Our property's in Oregon. What is our story and how are we telling it? And something that messaging that comes across, whether we're talking to policy people or having that social license to practice what we do well, having the intergenerational landowners, land managers, and knowing why you do it and the passion that you come with it, and letting people know more about that story so that you're able to give them the information in their own, not just getting it from a single source. Broadening the mind so that people don't bump into or jump into policy blindly. and act quickly, thinking that they're saving the world when they don't understand the world they're trying to save. So I think that was something that we learned on a different perspective as well. One of the things that we do in ag forestry on our international seminars is our classes are supposed to come with a budget, and then by the end of the trip decide where we are going to give. We're not just going as tourists. We're going to figure out how we're going to make connections and leave something behind, because we take so much, take pictures, take all the food, have a lot of fun, but what else can we do? So we found a need in Cambodia for clean water. So our class sponsored the drilling and creation of 8 community wells. We also interacted with the Cambodian Royal University and provided what we thought would be student support, but it turns out that they don't need the tuition support, so we were able to give about $1,500 for research support. And Justin has done, because he's our treasurer, he has done the interaction with the groups, and they continually send email updates, I would say about quarterly. So we're hearing that they're doing a great vermicompost or a worm compost research and program, and now the students are even commercializing what they're making. So they are taking our seed money and building on that, and then they're able to give back to their fellow students for more research in that area. And the other important group that we gave to was the Cambodian Landmine Museum. And you think you're going to go to a huge museum or something. It's a room, half the size of the room we're in, but demonstrates that all of the different kinds of landmines that have been placed in what would be farming fields since prior to, well before any American, Vietnamese, Cambodian conflict, there were landmines from all around the world. Every manufacturer of a landmine apparently left something there in Cambodia and the Cambodian fields. And to this day, farmers, their children, are being injured by these leftover landmines. And so the mission of this museum, the people that run it, they go and they do sweeps, and they open up and clear land for agriculture. They clear land for recreation. And so we gave them a pretty modest donation, but it turns out that the timing with which we gave it to them was important, because right then their country had shut down to tourism. Their only source of revenue were people coming in like me and buying a $10 t-shirt that probably might have cost them 50 cents, throwing in a couple extra bucks for a bracelet and taking a few pictures. That was their revenue source, and it was enough to help promote yearly extractions of these dangerous landmines. So the email that we received back was the most heartfelt and full of gratitude, because with no tourism, they had no funding. With no tourism, Cambodia was really shut down. All of our tour guides, all of our bus drivers, there is no other income for them at the time. So we were humbled, I think, in that realization. You come back and you're celebrating where you came from. Some of the comments, we after every seminar, we fill out a survey. How'd you like the accommodations? But what did you learn? What are you going to take what will be your leadership quality that you'll take from this? I pulled up the old survey because I found my classmates to be really strong leaders, and they continue to be. Several years later, I'm still very impressed with them. The overall sentiment is, I'll just read a little bit of one of them. I won't look at home quite the same way. I feel so blessed to live in the U.S., to come home to a healthy family and all the privileges we enjoy in Washington. I learned that the spirit of people is incredibly resilient, and I was reminded that life is a miracle and freedom should not be taken for granted. That more and more gratitude, it's hard to kind of read them all to you, and I'm sure that they weren't intended to be read aloud to large groups, but to let you know that this program instills in your Washingtonians, future leaders, this not just leadership skills of learning to communicate, speaking in public. I think I've said and a few more times. I'm out of practice. We've been Zooming so long, I really have kind of forgotten how to speak in person. But we're also teaching people the social skills, that quality that we want in leaders, where they can reflect and understand where they came from, and then bring that beauty back. Some of the hardest things to see were, of course, the conflict, but I don't want to leave with a bad feeling on that. We really saw great resilience in people who are super happy because they are loving every day of their life. They were well fed, had clean water, and had great families. And I think that's a universal truth. So that was pretty cool to see. The last thing that I'll think about, or I'll mention, before coming here and reflecting a little bit more on our time, was just what I'm saying. Happiness isn't owned by any one person or group, but that happiness was really a choice. We looked at, oh gosh, we come from this really wealthy country, and would we be happy living like this? And I think after 12 days, most of us said, you know what, yeah, because we could realize that we could choose to be happy with what we had and where we would be, surrounded by folks that were in that same mentality. Contentment. We know where would we be content with what we had? And I think that was a trickier thing to unpack. You can be content and happy, but are we always going to be content with just letting things happen to us? So as leaders, understanding that we need to set that example of service to our Washingtonians, the people in the U.S. that we're coming back home to. That leadership happens a variety of different ways, and that was definitely displayed on this trip. We had some leadership that was really just kind and just being a friend, and turned out that was the biggest moment we needed in a term of what could have been a really hardship day. Ended up being a great day because somebody stepped up and chose to make a good day, had a good attitude toward it. Hopefully there's lots of explanation probably about all these pictures, about all the different things that we saw. We were able to clearly see rice plantations, rubber tree plantations, pepper, lots of agriculture. And it turns out the other neat thing that happened when we came back, Costco had an article where Kirkland's black pepper was being sourced from Cambodia. And we're pretty sure that we saw some of the plantations where that was being grown. And it was really nice to also see that connection, because we could see, we were there firsthand, that they're really trying to do things in a sustainable way. So it's not just going in and taking what you need and leaving. That was pretty cool too.